here. Thanks for everyone for joining us today at the mentorSHOP. We do this on a reoccurring basis every Friday. My name is Jeremy Fojut. I am the co-founder of NEWaukee, and this is a program that we host on our Cloud Cafe, which has many different voices and programs for you to connect to your passions, purpose, and place. All of our programs are sponsored by Ginger Lazovik at Shorewest Realtors, so I appreciate her support as we transition from a lot of in-person programs to digital programs. Ginger and her team over at Shorewest Realtors really helped out and kind of supporting these programs as we go forward, so I appreciate that. We are joined today at the mentorSHOP by Kirsten Helgeson, and she is the CEO of Just a Girl, and she has many different acclimates. She's also on the steering committee of Women Entrepreneurship Week. She's also a TEDx speaker. She's a consultant. She's a co-founder and president of Oneida Equity. Is that what it is? Equity?
And equal equity. It's one of those long-term fun projects we hope comes to life one day.
Okay, so you have a lot of stuff going on. There's actually a longer list here, but maybe we don't have to go down the whole thing. So you do a lot, which is
not
great.
boring. I'm not boring, Jerry.
Not boring at all. And she also, just so you know, I spent the weekend with her in the woods. So for like, that was last October when we could be in person.
I know, it was a chilly October weekend, but we had a great time.
But it was a good time, and welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm super excited to be here, Jerry.
So there's people I've noticed at RSVP that aren't from Milwaukee, and I know that you do work not just in Milwaukee, but maybe people that aren't familiar with her, tell everybody what being a founder of Just a Girl is, and kind of your social mission.
So Just a Girl uses technology to foster mental health and women's empowerment efforts globally. And so really our goal is to build a global sisterhood of support and solutions. And we're one of those like big audacious companies that says, you know, there's a seat for all 4 billion women at our table. And so it's our job to create ways to connect and support and collaborate together through technology, and not using the barriers that put us together like distance and culture and stuff, really uniting through that and finding the intersectionality between all of us and our experiences. So yeah, that's kind of what we do. And it's exciting for me. I love that we're hopefully a couple of the people as part of the Just a Girl Sisterhood is on here today from all over the place. I know we've been doing a lot of work globally too, with the pandemic. And so, you know, it's just been, I feel really privileged and honored to be able to get to do the work I do every day.
And I'll ask you about that in a second, but when you talk about like this big audacious goal of globally, you obviously are starting it locally, you know, or like where you are. How do you get from, I mean, when I think of programs that we create, I always think of, wow, this could be global, this could be big, but it's like, how do you get there when you're just starting it? So tell me about that process and what that looks like.
It's funny, I kind of I backed into local stuff. I led with global, which I think is real stupid and crazy probably for lots of people. But, you know, I was a corporate girl for 12 years. And, you know, my corporate was a fantastic proving ground for me. It gave me tons of opportunity to really grow and cultivate for myself and my perspective on the world and do a lot of work with great people all over the globe. But I left corporate, actually, like it'll be next month, it's 4 years that I left corporate. And I started working with an organization, a startup that was focused on supporting women entrepreneurs globally. And so I transitioned from this like corporate space serving Fortune 500s, Fortune 100s, which are, you know, really many of national and global in nature, to then transitioning to a startup that was focused on international work. And so an international women entrepreneurs. And so that kind of really was a big turning point, I would say, for me, and a huge pivot. And so I started to work with like the global audience really, really quickly and understanding what was happening with women who are building things all over the world. Also, when I left and started doing all that, I started doing international disaster relief work. And so that was immediately putting me in very challenging situations all over the world. And so I do a lot of work with refugees, globally. I do work, tons of work down in Haiti with schools and orphanages. So there's lots of different places that I had to start plugging into on a global level. And when you do that, like, and I'm a networker at heart. I'm a connector at heart, right? Like I love people, right? So anytime I go somewhere, I'm like, you know, instantly making people my friends and getting to know them and what they're doing. And so, you know, I started to build up this kind of good global, reasonably like a good fighting weight kind of global network, right? And so then all of a sudden it was kind of like, oh my gosh, I need to do more on a local level, because here I am talking, you know, with tons of people all over the place, and I needed to kind of back myself into doing far more on a local scale. And so especially if you're, for me, you know, like we're trying to scale globally and make things both very big, but also intimate and personal and local. And so you know, we've been working on like testing out different models of like, how do we actually cultivate local and in person? And then how do we build that and connect people on a global scale? And so I would say like for people that are trying to like scale from local to global, it's about like just starting to connect with the right kinds of people and getting in some of those right circles. I mean, I was really lucky that I had an opportunity that like changed, it took my path in like a 90-degree angle. And so I think also you have to be brave enough to take those opportunities when they come along too. So, you know, it's who you meet, how you approach those different relationships, and what you do when good opportunities present themselves, I guess.
And then can you talk a little bit more about the technology? Like, can you dive into that and talk about how it works? You know, obviously talk a little bit about the why.
Mm-hmm. So we have a couple, so I like to talk about how Just a Girl is really like the parent company to cool and interesting and unique brands that are all directed toward our mission of fostering mental health and empowerment efforts globally. And so we have a couple of different brands within Just a Girl that do different things. One is Girl Talk Radio, and that's really our anchor brand. And so with Girl Talk Radio, it actually started off as a podcast. That's how I launched it last year. And the concept was to have honest, anonymous conversations on the emotions and experiences weighing heavy on the hearts of women and girls worldwide. And when I opened it up for people to for participants, I posted an ask on closed Facebook groups, like just a couple, maybe 3 or 4. And my home run was going to be if like maybe 30 or 40 women were leaning into that. And in 72 hours, I had 500 women on 5 continents asking to participate. And that is certainly not a podcast. You know, I can't say no, and you can't say talk to you in 5 years. So it forced me into this place where I had to kind of evaluate how do we build a bigger table faster so that we can have a seat at the table for all of those women who wanted to participate and share and collaborate in the spirit of what Girl Talk Radio was trying to bring to life. So we had to kind of like take a step back and spend a few months like really evaluating what we're going to do. And so we transitioned from just being Girl Talk as a podcast to Girl Talk Radio. And so we're building that out right now, and that's on-demand radio, multimedia, and feminist podcasting syndicate. So essentially we create our own content, have all of these conversations with women and girls globally on the things that are weighing on their hearts. And then we open that up for artists to contribute and interpret stories and tell stories in really unique and interesting ways. And then we also are a feminist podcasting syndicate. So we're going to basically help women get set up to have their own podcasts wherever they are in this world. And then we syndicate all of those podcasts. So essentially we become the megaphone of the voices of women and girls globally. And so from a tech standpoint, it's really about like, how do we build out our own system to be able to function in this capacity really well. And, you know, right now we're doing initial build outs, and we're going to be opening up an investment round, but to build out a more robust platform. But it's like block and tackle right now, you know, like we're going to have to manually add syndication in and all of that sort of stuff. So I would say like from a tech standpoint, you have to start with like what are available right now to be able to start helping people immediately, and then figuring out how you can actually scale that and bring the right people in to make sure that from a tech perspective, it becomes smooth at some point.
And if anybody has questions, you can post them in the chat. I'll get to those probably at the end or periodically if they kind of line up with something that Kirsten's saying. So you talked about how you kind of backed into it, but you know, you obviously had a plan. Tell us, did you have a plan when you first started this, or was it kind of just you're learning on, you know, you learned a little bit and you kept going? Or talk about that transition point.
Oh man, I mean, I think that I've been like, when I promoted, when I posted on social media that I was doing this with you, I said, I've failed more times than I can count. And I think that that's like a really big talking point for my life and my work, is that like, I've had to fail my way to this point that I'm at right now. And so like where I'm at today is, I would not have guessed, if you would have said 3 years ago that I was going to be doing this, I would have like totally wondered how that would be happening. So I would say like where I'm at now is entirely different. So I think that for me, it was like this humble process of learning through failure and realizing that like failure was simply an opportunity to learn and to pivot and adapt. And so like, yeah, I backed into doing different pieces of the work that I'm doing. And it kind of almost organically grew from the work that I was doing. I think the biggest part though for me was I could have fought this process of growth and rejection and failure, right? I could have stood up and been like, no, this is what I want to do. I'm going to dig in here. This is what I want. And instead I was like, okay, this isn't working. Something isn't resonating. The universe isn't saying yes to this right now. So like, how does this need to start? Like, where is the energy flowing to? And so, it's been a really big active listening process for myself of what the world needs from me, and checking my own ego and expectations and ideas along the way, because this isn't necessarily, the work that I do is not about me. It's about helping amplify the voices of women and girls globally, and through that amplification help women connect, grow, and share, so that we can actually start to make a big difference in our communities and our lives and the world around us. And so to do that though, I had to take a really big step back from myself and learn to listen really well, and then through that pivot.
And talking about pivoting and failure and success comes risk. Can you dice down your process to take on risk? It really comes down to, there's people that like look at this and go, wow, we're never going to do this. Like this could put us under, or we're never going to, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, or even the middle of the tunnel, or at the beginning and there's no light. So talk about that and what if you have a process to risk.
I mean, I would say that risk is like wading into a pool. Very few people like have to jump off into the deep end of the pool, right, with risk. But I think as I say that though, I'm also like realizing that many people right now feel like they've been dropped in the deep end of the risk pool. So, I guess it's like a Band-Aid that some people just had to rip off, or the world ripped off for them. But I kind of like waded into the risk pool, I guess. Like leaving corporate was probably a really big risk. And many people to this day think I'm crazy. Like people that I know and love continue to this day to send me like job postings for Fortune 100s and say like, you could go make a lot of money doing this right here. And so like, I mean, there's lots of people that think I'm crazy. So leaving corporate was a huge risk, I think, especially when you're coming from those golden handcuffs of corporate stability, right? But I just knew I had to for that, like it was one of those like personal survival things. Like if my heart is going to live, I need to do this. I need to at least try. And I felt like I was jumping into something relatively stable. Hindsight is 2020, right? It was totally not stable and, absolutely filled with craziness, but I still would do it. And so then from there, it just becomes this like ever approaching, like it's this scale that you start to walk through, like every decision you make leads to another slightly riskier decision. And I know for myself, people always ask me how I've built, they want to build something like I have built or am building, and want to do these kinds of things that I do. And I think I think people assume that it just takes a little bit of risk and a lot of heart, but I've also had to sacrifice a lot along the way. So like with risk has come personal sacrifice. So like I spent all my money to get to this point, right? Like you cash out bank accounts, and like that's when people think you're real crazy, is when you start like buy 401k, like because
what's a 401k?
It's a 401k.
The 104k.
Exactly. And so like that when you start and you don't like cash out your 401k all in one day, right? You draw it down in like these small little pieces. And so like, that's what it takes. Like when you talk about risk, it's around like first jumping toward something meaningful and authentic for you. And then it comes in like little bits of validation and going further down that risk like spectrum, where like suddenly you realize that you've spent all your money, and happily so, because you know it was needed. And suddenly you're like, okay, I need to pay bills now. Where does that money come from? And so then you start to get scrappy of figuring out ideas of ways to like bring some money in the door to pay your bills. And then suddenly,
fun.
Right? It's so fun. It's just so fun. But like honestly, also that's how Just a Girl came to life, was because I put myself in a position of immense risk, and I spent all my money, and I was trying to find options, and it was because of that Just a Girl was born. And so like getting to the point where like I was stripped of all of the things that I thought I needed in this world put me in a place where I could actually bring to life the thing I was supposed to do, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. And what do you learn from, and not that I recommend everybody leave their corporate job, especially now. I think back to when we started NEWaukee, it was during the last recession, and obviously we're entering the next one. So that did come out of a recession, or NEWaukee did come out of a recession as when we started it. But you left a corporate job. For anybody that is looking to leave or has a side hustle, or maybe isn't thinking about leaving, can you, before I get into the leadership questions, and I think this might be sticking on a lot of people, is when do I leave? How do you make that decision? Or how did you come to that decision?
It was a hard one for me, because I mean, my whole corporate career, I got to do all of the really great, fun, interesting stuff. You know, I was in strategic philanthropy and corporate social responsibility, global sustainability, diversity and inclusion, and branding through all of that. And so like, for me, I was doing like the really cool, fun, heartwarming stuff that like everybody in corporate wants to do. And so, but I think, you know, with corporate, I had this, it was the gift of being able to see what power, money, privilege, and opportunity can do in this world, right? But it also gave me a keen understanding of its shortcomings, because for all of that power, money, privilege, and opportunity, I just didn't feel like change was happening fast enough. And I was seeing bad things happening in the world around me, knowing that if there was a little bit more corporate bravery, we might have a different kinds of outcomes in this world. Mm-hmm. And so I realized at that point for myself that my success couldn't come on the backs of other people, whether actively or passively. And so I knew I had to then, like, there was really only one option. I had to let go of the golden handcuffs and start swinging for the fences on my own. And you have to, like, at that moment when you're leaving something big like that, I think for me, it was this immense sense of fear and also trust and hope. And like, even in my TED Talk, I start saying, like, I firmly believe that I can change the world with my own two hands. And I believe that every person is capable of changing the world with their own two hands. And so if we all started to like live our lives understanding that we have that immense power within us, what kinds of different choices would we be making? And so I'd rather, you know, like, we're human, right? We need examples. People, especially for women and girls, we need to, like, seeing is believing. And so, you know, I also talk a lot that I have 4 nieces and a nephew, and like, I knew that if I wanted them to have all of the choices and options in this world, that they first needed to see that happen in action in real life. And so that I needed to like pony up for myself, that if I want all of my nieces to have choices, I needed to give them to myself. And so I live in this very kind of example way now. Like, if I want my nieces to be the kind of people that can change the world, I first need to do it too. I have to have trust that I can do it.
Boy. You talk a lot, or at least we got into a long philosophical conversation in the cold of fall around social isolation and loneliness, and you know, that coming, and obviously right now we're probably more isolated than ever, even though we can be more connected than ever. Do you think companies, or maybe they will now, but do you think companies pay attention to that as part of their like retention plan, as part of their thoughts on how they engage people? Is there not enough emphasis put on that?
I think in the past, no. Minimal, or you know, maybe some like nice talking points because they have to, kind of a thing. But I think that, you know, this whole COVID-19 thing that's happening to us now, I think it's really drawn front and center the importance of our emotional and mental health, and not just in our everyday lives, but in our business, and how our world functions, how mental health and emotions are key to our economy and different pieces like this. And so I think that now companies are starting to much more pay attention. I don't think they have any idea what to do. And so we're trying on our side from a Just a Girl standpoint to like pivot and adapt to that, to like help people cope with this, help responders adapt to all of this, but also to help companies, because I don't think companies know how to pivot to meet the mental health needs of their employees as well as their customer base.
Yeah,
and
people aren't hiring on-site therapists. I mean, they can, but it's not a job you see open in like big companies.
No, but it should be, right?
Yeah.
Like it should be. And there should be policies and practices in place that support mental health and emotional well-being and prioritize that. I think what we're seeing now and what I've been hearing from a lot of people is that there's a lot of empathy theater happening. You know, like companies are saying that they understand, and, you know, middle managers and senior leaders are saying they understand, but then in policies, practices, and expectations, none of that is changing. And so it's more like empathy for the sake of optics versus like active compassion. And so I think that's what we need to start transitioning towards in our companies and our businesses, about like, how do we bring active compassion to life, and how do we prioritize the emotional needs and the mental health needs of our employees and the people we serve.
And you're kind of talking about organizational structure and blueprints, and we have actually a question from Andy in the room, and she asks, as businesses and organizations pivot to respond to the challenges within the economy and the marketplace, what suggestions would you offer to increase inclusive, fair-minded practices as they rebuild, and especially they have the opportunity to redraw their foundational organizational group blueprint right now? You know, what would you recommend around that?
Well, I think you need to bring a small group of people across an organization together who are going to be kind of a task force on all of this. And they have to be people that are willing to be brave with this. I think that, you know, when you're, especially from a change management perspective, there's like that desire to change only what you kind of have enough to get by, you know, versus like enough to really solve for a problem. And so I think you need brave leaders to form a task force first to be able to do far more than to do far more and impact more people across the organization to actually change DNA. From there, I think you need to start doing some strategic realignment and creative brainstorming. This is a perfect point where people need to evaluate what the mission of their business is and what are their ultimate goals, both right now with our COVID-19 world, but then also long term. Because I think what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of people out there who have been in this kind of like rinse repeat model of business for a really long time. And they only think that their business can function in that capacity. But the truth is we all are very dynamic people, and our businesses are dynamic also. And so if we start to actually go through like a creative strategy process of understanding what are our strengths individually as an organization, how do we then start to creatively align ideas and solutions to that actually embody and hold sacred like employee mental health and the customers that they're serving. And I think you actually can build resilient organizations that start to have, you know, that demonstrates the importance and the bottom line impact of mental health on an organization.
Yeah, totally. What about like, you know, this is the mentorship, so I want to get into a little bit of mentoring type advice, even though you're giving consistent mentoring advice, but a little bit more of like, there's times in everybody's career or in their company where they think stuff is so important in the moment, and it might strain relationships, it might strain the company, and then you realize like 5 months later it doesn't matter, like that thing didn't matter. And I think people go through that, and you know, you think about, I even think back to like 4 months ago when we were maybe talking about an event and the details that didn't matter. Now we're stuck pivoting around COVID. Like, this matters. Those little things didn't matter before, but we took it so serious. So there's something in your corporate life or as founder of Just a Girl that you thought was so important at the beginning that it just wasn't?
Oh hell, everything, right? Like I think that's it's also a beautiful thing. I know we can get in our own ways with all of this, but like there's something to be said for being excited and passionate about the work that you're doing, or, you know, the project you're bringing to life, or whatever it happens to be. That purpose, that passion is integral. It's important. It's like that thing that makes you tingly on the inside, knowing you're doing something right. I think that you need to start to examine what the difference is between like the purpose and passion and those tingles, and like frustration or, you know, anxiety or different things in that corporate space that creep in and pretend that they're passion, you know, like those are the things you need to start working toward. And I think that's about a personal practice, right? It's about finding tools to help you really sift through emotions, to understand how you're truly feeling, and to then evaluate, like, is this feeling something I should hold on to? And in lots of cases, if you're anxious or frustrated, those are feelings you need to let go of so that you can actually find the kind of calm solutions that are necessary to you know, resolve those issues. And so, yeah, I think it's about diligent self-care and self-management to know the difference.
What's something, I guess, in the corporate and in your entrepreneurial role here, what's something like a valuable lesson you've learned in each?
I mean, there's been so many good lessons.
Well, I just want one.
Just one. You know, I was really lucky. When I think about like pivotal moments for me, I think one of them was early on in my career. I was working in PR at an advertising agency. And in those kinds of situations, you can have, it's very highly competitive and a little bit like backstabby and cutthroat at times. And at least it was when I was in it. And it would be really easy to have managers and leaders that would micromanage you, you know, and like crush your ideas a little bit and try to have you fit in the box of what they wanted you to be in. And I was really, really lucky that I had both a senior leader and a client who saw that I had latent potential within me and just let me go. Like they let me run with ideas. They gave me budget to execute those ideas. They gave me a seat at much bigger tables than someone.
What was this company again?
I was at Kramer Castle actually, and my boss,
okay, yeah.
I'll call my boss at that time was Tina Daniel, and and my client at the time was Steve Thomas, and at Johnson Controls, and I can tell you that like their trust in me, their faith in me, and their like belief that I can do these things, like it created this from the start of my career, this like belief that I am capable of taking on big things, and that I had faith and trust in me from other people to do that. And I think that is so important. Like, I think that that's been reinforced across my career, is that you don't necessarily have to be the most senior person in a room to have the best idea. That like good ideas and solutions can come from unlikely places, from junior people, from folks outside of your industry, and like understanding and having some humility around that, I think is incredibly important. And so I feel really lucky that I had good, like those two people in my life, Tina and Steve, to really give me that faith and trust, and to like kick down the fences that other people would have put around me. And so I know for me, that's something that I always want to try to do for people that come and work with me or want to get involved in Just a Girl, is like, these fences are put there by people who don't necessarily know and love you and have faith in you. And so what would you do if you had no fences?
And I have a question I want to get to from Facebook Live, but I want to kind of double down on what you just said first. So those two people in your career, you know, sometimes we think mentoring is like a formal role, and I don't think it always is. I know sometimes it could be like, okay, you're going to be this mentor, this person, and that's fine too. But it's great. I've had plenty of mentors in my life. But are those two people, were those formal roles, or were those just people, and you have this core 5 of people that you go to all the time?
So for Tina, she was the VP on the accounts that I was working on. So like, she wasn't my direct manager, but she was the senior leader over that. And so like, she gave me a lot of ability. She gave me just like wide open fences because she just knew that I could do it. And my client at Johnson Controls, Steve, he gave me full carte blanche to like revamp markets that hadn't had any action on them for years. And so I took like dead marketplaces, and he gave me money, and I like brought them to life, and they became like these big superpowers. And so they were in official roles as far as like being in the structure that I was like being official within the structure I was in, but they were by no means like official mentors or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I still to this day don't think that Tina and Steve even know how much I adore and value the contributions they had on my life and my career at that time.
You should send them a LinkedIn message today, because that's personal.
Yes, right? I love them both. So if anybody knows Tina Daniel or Steve Thomas, they're wonderful humans, and always give them lots of love.
What about, is there a time in your career you didn't feel successful? I mean, I think in entrepreneurship that happens every day.
All the time. I still don't feel successful.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, maybe that's a good thing, right? In corporate world, I don't remember feeling like I was always like never successful all the time, but like in entrepreneurship, I feel like it's a daily occurrence.
Oh, all the time. All the time.
Give us one of those examples.
I mean, we've really been pivoting to create and build out programs to support people, responders, and companies during this COVID-19 time. And I wanted things to like basically like magically like snap my fingers and they would like appear programs. And I mean, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't work that way, right? Like there's
Wish they did.
Right? And so I was getting a little critical of myself that it was taking like a month for me to put these things together. And then I had to like take a step back and really breathe and realize that like in a month I was able to build 2 different programs that had people from like 15 or 20 countries across the world participating. And like that doesn't happen ever. And so basically that's like magic happening right there. And so then I have to remind myself that like, Kiki, you're pretty badass. Like, it's okay. You know what you're doing. And so I can get still to this day, like super down. To this day, I still think that I should be building faster, all that sort of stuff. Like I'm not doing good enough. And I think that that's part of this like dialogue that we're given around our like work performance and expectations. I think it's bred into us really early on that like, we're in a meritocracy. And so the better you do, the better you are. And so I need to still to this day, like I have to check those voices for myself and remind myself that I am doing good work, that I'm helping lots of people, even if it's one person a day some days. And that like, even on the days where I feel like a total failure or I'm not doing good enough, that like tomorrow is a totally new day. And so, it's that inner dialogue and kind of trying to silence that little voice inside that says like, you're not good enough or you're not doing enough or all that stuff.
I want to slide this Facebook Live question in here because it has a little bit to do this. And I think it was something you talked about at the beginning about your risk you took when we were talking about that. But it's from Allison on Facebook Live. And she asks, what did your recovery process look like when you took a huge emotional, personal, and financial, all the 3 risk and had some failure in that?
I mean, let's be real, Jeremy. Like being entrepreneurs, everything is personal, business, and financial. It's all like wrapped up into one thing at this point. Like my work is my life is my work. And so I would say like, there was this at the end of 2018. So when I started building my organization, it was entirely different back in 2018. I was going down, like building it as a nonprofit at that point. I was looking to do a lot of like public art, like all of these really cool things. So that to this day, I still think are really awesome. But like the universe was not working in my favor. Like it just wasn't clicking. And even like forming a nonprofit wasn't even working out right. So I got to this point by the time like, winter was rolling around in 2018 where I was like broke and nothing was working. And I just didn't know what to do next, but I knew I had to keep walking down the path and I couldn't like sell out and go to corporate because for me, that was like my definition of failure because it means that I like couldn't do what I wanted to do in this world.
Yeah.
And so like, that's honestly the point where I was like, okay, we're going to need to make some money, girl. Like some bills need to get paid here. And I actually drove Uber for one day. I drove Uber for one day.
Let's really deep. Let's dive deep into that.
Yeah.
What,
I did.
how many customers did you have?
I had like 5 or 6 that day. I just drove it
Okay.
for one day. But like, it's funny because the first person I picked up was an entrepreneur, and he had a colleague of his like in the car with him. And these were dudes in like, I would say mid 40s, mid 50s, like that's their age ranges.
Mhm.
And they were talking about how they were raising a round and how an investment round. And they were talking about like how they have connections at JP Morgan and should they take money from China and like all of that sort of normal chatter that you hear white men who are entrepreneurs talking about. And so there was a lull in their conversation, and I simply asked like, oh, what does your company do? And he told like it was a health company. And I asked like, do you have any machine learning or AI built into your system? He's like, really uncomfortably like, yeah, I have an algorithm. And I'm like, oh, awesome. That's great. Are you raising Series A, Series B? Where are you at in your funding cycle? And he like had this just like like life was draining out of him. And he's like, we're raising Series B. I'm like, oh, congrats. That's awesome. And so then he asks me what I do. And so I gave him like a snapshot of my background. And he's like, and you live here? I'm like, yep, Wisconsin girl. And then he went silent. And then all he like 2 minutes later, all he could muster up was, wow, good luck to you. And then they could no longer keep talking about business in front of me. They had to start talking about boats. And when they got out of the car, the only thing this man could say to me again was, wow, good luck to you. And then he closes the door. Right? And
That isn't weird. That's weird.
and so a couple of riders later, I picked up this younger guy who was having a tough time, and he was a financial advisor. And so I had a couple of hard meetings, and I had talked to him about this experience I had had earlier, and he started laughing. And he said to me, he's like, you don't understand. To those guys, you were just a girl and just an Uber driver at that. They didn't expect for you to be so much more than who you are on the front, on like the surface.
Mhm.
And so that I went home that night and I made $100 that day driving Uber. Picked up, a bunch of different people, and I wrote about all of this on like one of the Facebook group for female founders, and it like lit up like a Christmas tree, like it just totally went viral in this community. And so then it was like clear that I needed to do something with it. So that's how Just a Girl was born. I literally took like a week after that and like put my structure together and started like running with it.
Yeah.
And so like that's a really long story, but it's to say that like because
That is a great story.
okay,
Yeah.
but like because I was willing to tolerate ever increasing risk along the way and get to the point where I like ran out of options for myself and needed to like think of other things, it put me like in the exact position I needed to have to drive Uber for one day to pick that dude up, like that's what I needed to do. And the universe needed to take everything else away from me so that I would go do that, so that I could bring this to life. And so like recovering through all of that risk and failure, I think like the upside is that I get to do this now. And yes, this is hard, and sure, I could use money, and like, yeah, I have to sacrifice a lot personally along this path, but like, I think I'm building something that's truly remarkable and amazing, and it makes women around this world feel safe. And if that's all I accomplish for the rest of my life, I'm good with it.
Great. Since we're coming up on time, I want to go into our finishing kind of touches, our last couple questions here, and then maybe open it up for any other questions. But if there was 1 to 2 things that you could recap this entire conversation and tell everybody to take what they should take away from it, can you provide us with that?
Sure. Your mental health matters. Like, I think that's one of the lessons we're learning throughout this whole experience with COVID-19 is your mental health is the driving force of your success in life. And I'm not even just making this up, like research shows that 75 to 90% of success is driven by mental health. And so like pay attention to that, like lean into it and find healthy ways to understand your emotions and process them so that you can be a better parent, you can be a better spouse, you can be a better business leader. Like you can build better things when you're mentally strong and healthy. So mental health matters. I would also say like, understand your risk tolerance and try to like edge that out a little bit every day or every month with small little choices. Because over time, like adding in a little bit of risk every couple of months, all of a sudden, like in 6 months, you'll realize that you're able to do much bigger, bolder things. And I think that that opens up a whole new world of potential and opportunity for people. And also, like, don't be afraid to put yourself second and your ego second to what you're supposed to do in this world. I think sometimes we lead with what we want and how it gratifies us as humans. And I know that's a human, right? It's a human nature to want to do that. But if you can learn to like put yourself on the back burner and your ego on the back burner, interesting things come of it. And you can help more people in a much more authentic way. And I think that that's been really integral to me in my success.
Great advice. Then finally, or I kind of have a fun question here. I always like to ask this question of everybody. What's kind of something that, how should I ask this? What's one thing that you would tell yourself 4 years ago when you started this?
It's funny, like people talk about regrets often and like talking to their former selves, and like I think for me if I could go back even 4 years, I would just say like trust the process. Like I fundamentally believe that failure is my co-creator, and so when something fails, it allows me to like figure out what window is open and follow that path. And so like I would just remind myself that you're on a good path. Just like trust yourself, trust the path you're on, and like don't fight it. Like allow it to flow, because when you start to allow that to flow, really interesting things come of it. And like let go of the things that are not meant for you along that way.
And then what books or other speakers beside yourself do you recommend checking out?
You know, I'm not, this is going to sound like horrible. I'm not a huge book reader. I don't have the time to like sit down and read books, but I read a lot of content that authors create, and I'm constantly reading a lot of articles and journals and things like that. So I would say for people, read a diverse cross section of lots of different thoughts and opinions, and be curious. And because when you're curious about all kinds of random things, like even like the fundamentals of energy in the universe and like how atoms work, like that's interesting stuff, and somehow that might trigger an idea for something. And so
Totally.
right, like you never know.
I have a book. I have 3 books I'm reading at the same time, but I haven't started at the beginning. I went to like chapter 8, chapter 3 and 1, and then so it's like all kind of placed around.
Oh, I love that. No, so,
I looked at the table of contents and go, that sounds interesting. Let me go read that chapter.
I might drop this because I don't have time to read a book cover to cover, but I would totally pick up random chapters. I might start.
Totally. Yeah, there you go. There's my mentor advice for the show. Any questions from the audience? I think maybe Rita, if you want to open it back up here, we'll end the Facebook Live portion of this, and we could show everybody on camera again as we kind of finish up here. If you want to come back without your being muted out, you can come back on, and you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you want to put in the chat, I can read it as well. And maybe to kick it off, I think I could maybe ask one more question. Any inspirational advice you want to share with anybody, even though the whole thing has been kind of inspirational to me?
You are much stronger than you think you are. And you have an immense ability to create a beautiful world around you within your own 2 hands. And so if you can just find the courage and the strength within you to recognize that and start making small actions toward that with that belief in mind, beautiful things will start to happen. They might be hard things sometimes, but at least they'll be beautiful.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Danny.
I was typing, but I wasn't typing fast enough.
No worries.
So my question for you is, given that you've leaped out of corporate America and into your own, and by the way, thank you, this has been awesome. What happens, what kind of advice could you give, like when you go to do a task, and of course there's lots of tasks to do, and the task feels like just insurmountable at times. And so then you get sort of nervous and then you procrastinate because you're like, well, I'll do anything else with this one task. So I'm curious to hear what gets you over the hump to get through it and get that thing that seems so daunting done.
I feel like I'm practicing that as well myself all the time. I have a mountain of things that could use my attention all the time. And I've become really good at prioritizing. I think it's part of also how I'm like psychologically set up is I'm really good at figuring out what are the top couple of things that are the most important and running towards those. And that comes at the detriment of other things at times, but that's what needs to happen. And so I would say like, I am prioritize like, what are the top 1, 2, 3 things that you can do? And then to like, actually like motivate yourself to get over the hump. When I have to do those things, I actually listen to Sia on YouTube. Like I turn the Sia channel on and like, I listen to the song Unstoppable. And so like that, like music and those words help me like get over the hump. I'm also like I'm an ENFP. And a while back, there was this whole like meme on Facebook, and it said, "What does hell look like for each Myers-Briggs personality type?" And for mine, it was to do a series of seemingly meaningless tasks in perpetuity. And so, for me, I also recognize that like when those mountains of seemingly unimportant, meaningless tasks in perpetuity come along, that are they important for me to do? Can someone else do them for me? Or do I just need to like buck up, listen to some Sia and just park myself until I leave? I try to like put a lot of beverages around me and maybe a snack or two and like pump angry lady music and then just go for it.
That's awesome. Thank you. That was awesome.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Kirsten, for your time. And I've been looking at I've been on a lot of these Zoom events and other things like that, and they always end really awkwardly. So I'd like to end it, it's kind of like it just shuts down and you're like, it's over. And then when you're a host of it, you're like, okay, now what? Because, at a regular event, you would be talking and there'd be small talk and, relationships. But it doesn't really happen as much. So I want everybody just to clap with the little clap icon. Stupid. It could be a fun way to end it and say thank you for your time. And if you want to connect with Kirsten, she's on LinkedIn. I imagine you're on Twitter and MySpace and whatever else you're on.
MySpace. Oh my.
Facebook.
I love it.
Yeah, so.
It's the 90s in us, Jeremy. It's the 90s.
Welcome back. Your AOL chat rooms, whatever you want to find you. Okay. Well, thanks for your time, Kirsten. I'll talk to you later.
See you later, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much.